Night City, the city on the edge of tomorrow. In the year 2077, the sprawling metropolis stands as a testament to progress, capitalism, and the unbreakable spirit of man. Beneath the shimmering lights and glossy beauty of its surface, Night City breathes and flows with the sins and exploits of those that call it home. Crime, violence, passion, danger, and opportunity all mingle in a glorious tapestry that depicts what life is like in this marvelous jewel of the future. Night City is like those that inhabit it. It has seen suffering and glory in equal measures. It is scarred and broken in places, yet it maintains an air of presence and absolute authority. It is a character, all on its own, and has well earned the various reputations that now describe it. A place where anyone can make their mark and rise up from nothing. A place of suffering and violence, where the strong rise up, walking on the corpses of the weak and broken. Night City can be many things to many people, but before all this, it was simply one thing, one idea in the mind of one man. From a young age, Richard Knight was a man possessed of great vision and foresight. He held a solid understanding of what was needed to progress and grow as a capitalist. Wielding his clever mind, Knight founded a massive development company alongside two business partners and friends. Hazley, Ferris, and Knight worked on corporate construction projects and residential developments. The three men were quite adept at their business, and so the company rose to prominence. Despite their considerable success, Richard felt dissatisfied with the work they were doing. His ambitions carried him much further than apartment buildings and offices. He dreamed of creating something truly spectacular. By the year 1990, Knight had grown thoroughly bored with the work he was doing with Hazley, Ferris, and Knight. Shortly after, he left the company and founded his own, a corporation named Knight International. This would be the catalyst for Richard's magnum opus, a capitalistic utopia, a city devoted purely to the advancement of technology and commerce, devoid of governmental regulation and law. A place where corporations would be free to operate and expand, guided only by their own hand and those of the ones in power. This was to be the city of the future, a place so grandiose in both culture and technology that it would make any other in the world pale in comparison. It would be no small task, and Knight knew that he would not accomplish his vision on his own. He would need investors and corporate partners to assist with the establishment and construction. Just 2 years later, Knight completed the necessary preparations. Having considerable experience and clout within the industry, Richard was able to use his connections to garner the favor of three titans for his cause. Knight was able to bring Arasaka, EBM, and Metrochem into the fold under his banner. With these mega corporations at his side, Knight had the necessary resources to accomplish his dream. All that was left now was to find a location. From its inception, Knight always wanted to use Central California as the staging area for his project. The location offered all that he imagined in the way of scenery and ease of access for transportation. Luckily, Petrochem owned much of the land surrounding the Del Coronado Bay. This was a huge advantage for Knight, who was then able to purchase the necessary lands for what would come to be known as Coronado City. The stage was set, and the aptly named Coronado City was well under construction less than a year after the land was purchased. Following his creed of innovation and advancement, Knight only used the newest and most innovative technologies and construction methods to develop the picturesque locations and buildings that would make up Coronado City. Casting away the tried and archaic methods of the past, Knight ventured forward with only the future in mind. In doing so, he threw aside Hazley and Ferris, his old partners. Knight now considered his old firm too antiquated to work on the development of Coronado City, a slight which Hazley and Ferris did not take well. After his departure from the firm, a third member named Skiv had been added as the company head. In the years since Knight's departure, the firm had fallen from their lofty heights and had taken to partnerships with less than reputable men. In this time, the three men had aligned themselves with a mob organization that held powerful influence over the North Cal area, where Coronado City was being built. Knight began to receive daily threats on his life from those he once called colleagues. Hazley, Ferris, and Skiv all wished to be brought into the construction of the city, it being an incredibly massive and equally lucrative venture. Richard Knight was a man of pride, and despite the constant threats, he remained unmoved. For over 4 years, he ignored the repeated attempts on his life. Paisley, Ferris, and Skiv used their mob associations and control of the residential areas around the growing city to launch repeated attacks on Richard. As time went on and the danger mounted, Knight realized that he would need assistance in defending himself from the increasingly desperate assaults. Knight enlisted the help of his corporate partners to deal with the continuous threats on his life. They assured Knight that the business would be taken care of. With their considerable personal military power, the megacorps descended on the mobs with exacting fury and quickly took care of the issues in large quantities. Despite this, on September 10, 1998, Knight was found dead in his penthouse suites within the Parkview Towers. Clear signs of foul play at the scene. The megacorps, which had partnered with Knight, scoured the area, but the killer has never been found. To this day, the identity of the assassin is still unknown. In lieu of this tragedy, the newly appointed city council renamed Coronado City. Through this act of violence, and in an effort to pay homage to its founder, Night City was born. This would be the start of a gruesome and bloodied history for the city on the edge of tomorrow. With the passing of Richard Knight, a sizable void was left behind in the structure of power and influence that governed the city. The king was dead, and many that wished to seize the crown rushed forward in a mad dash for control. On one side of the conflict sat the megacorporations that had established themselves within the upper districts of the city. With the corporate center as their core and the local government under their heel, they swung private military forces and financial influence like a stone hammer, doing all they could to smash themselves into the ruling slot. On the other sat the various gangs and mob bosses that littered the residential and underground areas. They held greater numbers and influence over services needed for everyday life. Their control fell over the people, those that wanted to simply live their lives in the place they called home. Even the police were powerless against these Goliaths, acting only as pawns for whichever side offered the most money or security. The war raged on and Night City suffered. For 7 years, the city was held hostage by these two rivaling factions. Gangs were formed on both sides to act as the fighting forces. The streets became combat zones where endless conflict and savage violence rained down on any who stood within. This would escalate over time until a breaking point was reached. Due to their larger influence and greater numbers, the mob gained the upper hand in the conflict, and by 2005, they had seized majority control over a substantial portion of the city. The megacorps retreated to their strongholds in the corporate plaza within the outlying sector of Beaversville. The bloodshed had taken a considerable toll, and by this time, they no longer had any interest in the well-being of the city. Years of fighting had drained away millions in expenses, and without the megacorps to back the government, the mob and their gangs were free to bring chaos and destruction down on the residents. With little to stand as their opposition, the gangs ran rampant. Wild and with little in the way of direction or leadership, the criminal masses simply did as they pleased with their newly acquired territory. Looting, murder, drug trafficking, and more became commonplace, and even something as simple as going out for groceries became an issue of life and death. The chaos drove many citizens out of Night City, yet many more still held on, either unable or unwilling to escape the devastation that the gang war brought to them. All of this became increasingly bad business for the megacorps, their power now secluded purely to the small commercial sectors they controlled within the corporate plaza. It all came to a head in 2011 when the Arasaka Corporation took a dedicated stand against the roaming hordes of gangs within the city. A massive military force, backed by the Arasaka, took to the streets in a ruthless strike. Fighting once again filled the streets of Night City, skirmishes and assaults occurring in multiple locations at once. The sounds of gunfire, screaming, and death filled the night as the Arasaka swept the city of its disease. With the advanced technology and sheer expertise of the Arasaka soldiers, the mob was overwhelmed and effectively defeated. A new government was set in place. The Arasaka installed puppets as the new public heads of Night City. With these new positions of power, they started down the road to renovate and heal the devastated metropolis. Due to the massive influx of military forces and their subsequent need for housing, a large portion of the city's civilian population was displaced, their homes given away to the soldiers. This caused a huge spike in the number of homeless within the major residential areas, forcing most to relocate to the outskirts and less populated zones. This would bring its own issues in time as these areas became more hazardous and clear divide between the wealthy and the poor was drawn, causing a rift among the populace. Despite this, the major threat of the gangs was now removed and the city began to prosper. By 2020, the city had reached stability and had become a close representation of the city that Knight had envisioned. It was by no means a safe place to live for the common person. The increased homelessness issue brought with it crime and poverty in equal measures. New and exciting drugs spread like a fashionable infection through many residential areas. The newly established military police moved about the streets with cruel indifference and acted with swift and efficient violence at the slightest provocation. It would not be uncommon to see someone carrying both a briefcase and a handgun as they made their daily commute to work. However, the city continued to grow. Technological advancements and the accompanying commercial and influential benefits of them made Night City a veritable mecca of the future. It was the place to be if you were anyone who wanted to make a name for themselves. The latest cybernetics, whether cosmetic or practical, were readily available to anyone with the money to afford them, and soon became part of the ever-shifting trends of fashion and design. The city prospered and became a well-known place. Unfortunately, this time of peace and healing would not last. With the clear enemy of the gangs now removed, the megacorps found themselves engaged in deep internal conflicts. With its status as a free city, Night City was not under the direct control of any major governmental power. It stood on its own and was led internally by the megacorps, who had established powerful strongholds within the corporate sector. From their towers, they waged war on one another, and the streets were once again filled with the horrid sounds of death and destruction. The Arasaka group faced off against Militech, being the two primary military forces within the borders of the city. Unlike the gangs, both sides of this conflict held considerable resources and thus were able to bring about a new level of chaos to Night City. This would all come to be known as the Fourth Corporate War. The corporate zone was flooded with heavy attack drones, corporate kill squads, and even tanks. Those that were not part of the fighting did their best to escape the carnage, and many residents abandoned the inner areas of the city in an effort to reach safety, rushing to the outskirts and finding refuge in places like Pacifica and Haywood. The final blow came in 2023 in the form of a nuclear attack. In an attempt to cripple the powerhouse of the Arasaka, Militech launched a direct attack on their headquarters within the city. Arasaka Towers was a monolithic structure composed of twin towers connected by a bridge. The towers stretched up to 140 floors, making it one of the largest structures in the world at the time. It housed many Arasaka members as well as their leadership and, most importantly, their master database. The exact location of the database was unknown, and so Militech used a covert ops squad to move a pocket nuke into the facility in order to bring the entire complex down. The assault did not go as planned, and the bomb was detonated early, around the 120th floor. With a destructive force roughly 1/4 the power of the little boy dropped in Hiroshima, the explosion completely demolished the towers. The blast annihilated the city center in seconds. Many of those in the area simply turned to dust. The towers blew outwards, and in short order the whole zone became rubble. The foundation of Night City itself shook and buckled with the impact as the landfill used to establish the city was liquefied, causing the ground itself to give and break. The explosion occurred high above the ground, about 1,200 feet. A strange piece of luck, as it caused much of the radiation to disperse into the air rather than to the ground, where it would hold for much longer. The towers themselves were disintegrated into particulate, which rained down on the entire North Carolina region, as well as the surrounding coast. The dust clouds completely filled the air, and for many years afterwards, the whole of Night City would be enveloped in the crimson shade of a red sky. The years that followed would be marked as some of the hardest in the city's history. With the majority of the city center now a smoking heap, the populace was forced outward towards the east, north, and south. Areas that had been long abandoned were repopulated, and neighborhoods grew with a new sense of rough kinship. There was no time to fight among one another. Survival became a powerful bond that united those that had to make do in their new homes. Nearly 2 million people were displaced by the bomb, and tent towns grew in places like Pacifica, Haywood, and Westbrook. These places would become communities in time, and many of those that fled there to find shelter would become permanent residents. The Arasaka, severely wounded by the attack and the subsequent propaganda put out by Militech and the US government, were forced out of Night City. The US itself had no intentions of assisting Night City in their rebuilding efforts, and Militech had already discarded the place as a loss. With no help coming, the remaining government rallied and reached out for private contractors to assist. Favors were cashed and debt mounted, as a wide array of edgerunners were brought in to assist with the recuperation efforts. The debris around the explosion site was moved and used as landfill for the areas that had become structurally weak due to the nuke. Radiation was not much of an issue, as most citizens had cybernetic augmentations to filter out any hazards. The next few decades would be marked by a long period of reconstruction and growth. The corporate center rose once again from the corpse of the previous, and new glittering skyscrapers grew towards the smog-filled sky. The city buzzed with electric life once more. This period also cemented Night City's status and relationship as a free city. The new USA had done nothing to assist in the reconstruction and still vied for a way to bring the city back into the fold of the US government. These efforts were smashed by the return of the Arasaka, who would now be acting as the primary peacekeepers and military defense for Night City. Their new headquarters were built upon the bones of the previous, and they now stand as the head megacorporation within the city borders. In 2069, an official treaty was signed between the NUSA and Night City. With the Arasaka standing guard, the new United States had no position on which to try and take the city. Night City was marked as a free city state that had no direct affiliation to the NUSA or any other free states. This new freedom brought commerce and growth as new megacorporations established themselves in the newly rebuilt metropolis. In 2077, the city has seen much growth and prosperity for those that have managed to survive its dangers and darkness. The Corps are ever present, their power and influence growing steadily as the city itself expands. Gang activity is still prevalent in many areas, and new subsets like the Voodoo Boys and the Valentinos have cut a piece of the city out for themselves. The city is not safe. It is a far cry from the dream that Richard had for it. It will never truly be safe, but that has become part of its charm. Richard Knight wanted his city to be a place of opportunity, where anyone can make something of themselves. This is a place for the strong, the clever, and the ruthless. Every new day brings new challenges, and the city at the edge of tomorrow welcomes all who wish to test their mettle.